call this hearing to order, this hearing of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Strategic Forces. Today we're focused on the U.S. Strategic Forces posture, and we have again this year a tremendous pair of witnesses. No pressure, fellas. The Honorable Brian Mccuan, Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Department of Defense, and Admiral Cecil Haney, Commander Stratcom. I want to, as always, thank y'all for the time it takes to prepare for these. I know it's inconvenience and takes a lot of time and effort, but it's very helpful to us, so I do appreciate that. We also appreciate the seriousness with which you've prepared for this hearing, and I assure you we approach our responsibility to provide oversight, policy, and funding authorization for the nation's nuclear deterrent, missile defense, and national security, space systems, and capabilities with the same seriousness. Your testimony will directly inform the policy and funding authorization decisions we make in the coming weeks as we prepare for the NDAA. These three mission areas could not be more important, indeed existential to the nation's security. Admiral Haney, I noted your recent appearance at the Center for Strategic and International Studies when you stated, quote, "We are out of time. Sustainment is a must. Recapitalization is a requirement. Our budget has a deterrent value of its own and reflects our nation's commitment to our deterrent strategy. Our adversaries pay close attention to whether we back up our words with resources. Our choice is not between keeping the current forces or replacing them. Rather, the choice is between replacing those forces or risk not having them at all," close quote. Admiral Haney, I hope you repeat this point as often as you can. To many in the public policy and advocacy machine in this city, they either aren't aware of this fact or they're willfully choosing to ignore it. We can't help those who are willingly choosing ignorance, but we shouldn't give up on those who just aren't aware of the facts. Mr. Mckeon, I know you spent a significant amount of time and energy on the Department's Nuclear Enterprise Review of 2013. I'm eager to hear how you are ensuring the momentum achieved during this review is maintained, especially as we see key recommendations like the replacement of the Vietnam-era missile-filled security helicopters that are languishing in red tape in the Air Force and the Joint Staff. And I know I don't have to tell you, but I feel it is essential that the American people are aware of the increasing threat we face in outer space. We are facing serious and growing foreign threats to our space systems. We need to work closely with Stratcom and OSD to ensure that a warfighter has the capabilities and authorities to fight and win a war should it extend into space. With that, I recognize the gentleman, my friend from Tennessee, Mr. Cooper, for any opening statement he may want to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to add my voice in welcoming the witnesses and also emphasize for this public portion of the hearing that there probably are no more important issues that our nation or the world faces, because these are existential issues. We've got to get this right, and I appreciate the long professional involvement of both of our witnesses in making sure that we do get these vital existential issues correct. It's also important from a fiscal standpoint because literally this is $1 trillion subject here, and we've got to get that right as well to make sure that we have a safe, secure, and reliable nuclear deterrent as efficiently as possible, and that costs real money because we're also talking long-range bombers here, we're talking about new submarines, we're talking about keeping our ICBM missile fields state-of-the-art. So these are extremely important topics. Sadly, a lot of our duties have to be held in secret, but I welcome the witnesses and look forward both to the public and the private portions of this hearing.
Thank you, and as always, your opening statements, your full opening statements will be accepted for the record without objection. And now I recognize you, Mr. Mccuan, for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cooper, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to testify today on the fiscal 17 budget request for strategic forces. We are grateful in the department for your continuing support of this critical mission of nuclear deterrence and nonproliferation. Earlier this month, Secretary Carter identified 5 evolving challenges that have driven the focus of the Defense Department's planning and budgeting this year. The first and second challenges reflect a return to great power competition with Russia and China. Third is North Korea. Fourth, Iran. And fifth, our ongoing fight against terrorist organizations. Each has implications for our current or planned strategic capabilities and posture. Let me address each of these briefly in turn. First, China is introducing qualitative advances into its nuclear and conventional military capabilities as it continues to rise in the Asia-Pacific region. We will continue our rebalance to maintain the regional stability that we have underwritten for 70 years and that has allowed many nations to prosper. Second, Russia poses one of our most pressing and evolving strategic challenges felt across the strategic forces mission. Russia has undertaken aggressive actions in Crimea and elsewhere in Ukraine and has adopted a pattern of reckless nuclear posturing and coercive threats. Russia remains in violation of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and Russia remains unreceptive to the President's offer to negotiate further reductions following the New START Treaty. Third, North Korea's evolving nuclear weapons and missile programs pose a continuing threat to the United States and our allies and partners. Last month, North Korea conducted its 4th nuclear test, and earlier this month conducted a ballistic missile launch that successfully placed a satellite into orbit. Fourth, as we work to counter Iran's malign influence against our allies and partners in the Middle East, we will remain vigilant for any reversal of course by Iran on its commitments under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Iran's ballistic missile program is the largest in the region, and we must continue to enhance our ability to defend against this ballistic missile threat today and in the future. As Secretary Carter has underscored, the nuclear deal does not in any way constrain or inhibit the ability of the United States to defend itself or our allies and partners. Finally, denying terrorists access to weapons of mass destruction and weapons-usable materials is an absolute imperative in the ongoing fight to defeat terrorist organizations. Let me focus briefly on some key details in the fiscal 17 budget. First, on nuclear deterrence, although the President's ultimate goal is a world without nuclear weapons, he has been clear in his commitment to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal for as long as nuclear weapons exist. This is the highest priority of the Department of Defense. We work closely with the Department of Energy to maintain the safety and security of our nuclear forces at the lowest possible number of weapons, consistent with retaining a full set of options to respond to and to address current and potential threats. Our budget request focuses on maintaining stable and robust deterrence in a time of geopolitical uncertainty, while also managing the transition to a modernized nuclear force through life extension programs for warheads, replacement of aging delivery systems, and enhancements to sustainment and operations of the current force. It also includes funding necessary to continue addressing the findings of the nuclear enterprise reviews. Our plan is fully consistent with the administration policy of reduced role for nuclear weapons in our defense strategy and retains only those capabilities we need to sustain stable and effective deterrence. The effort to modernize our delivery systems and extend the life of our warheads across the triad and our non-strategic nuclear force will require significant resources over the next decade and beyond. This critical investment is affordable if prioritized appropriately by the Department, the Congress, and the nation. On missile defense, our request funds the development and deployment of a robust ballistic missile defense capability to protect our homeland, deployed forces, and allies and partners. North Korea's launch, which I recently mentioned, underscores the importance of BMD in protecting the homeland and the need to increase the number of our deployed ground-based interceptors to 44, develop a redesigned kill vehicle, and proceed with the development of long-range discrimination radar. Our budget funds all of these. As North Korea and potentially Iran make progress on ICBM-class missile technologies, we must be prepared to address new, more complex threats in the next decade. To that end, our budget requests funding for investments in new technologies, including directed energy and the multi-object kill vehicle. Progress on these technologies, as well as adapting current technologies to new purposes, will enable us to meet advancing threat and lower the costs of intercepting ballistic missiles. Our budget also reflects the Department's commitment to building regional missile defenses that are interoperable with systems deployed by international partners. We continue to implement the European phased adaptive approach to missile defense, which is designed to protect our deployed forces and allies in Europe from attacks in the Middle East, emanating from the Middle East. In December of last year, the Missile Defense Agency declared the Aegis Ashore defense system in Romania technically capable of defending against Iranian ballistic missiles. The request supports the implementation of Phase 3 of EPAA, including the upcoming groundbreaking at the Aegis Ashore site in Poland, which will be completed in the 2018 timeframe. Mr. Chairman, let me briefly touch on space. In his worldwide threat assessment testimony earlier this month, the Director of National Intelligence said that Russia and China understand how our military fights and how heavily we rely on space, and they are each pursuing destructive and disruptive anti-satellite systems. To address these concerns, the Department conducted a portfolio-wide strategic review of our space systems, focusing on how we assure space capabilities in light of current and future threats. The results included significant new adjustments in the budget starting with last year and continuing in this year. In addition, we are strengthening the governance of our space enterprise and providing an independent voice and providing assessments to the Secretary. At Air Force Space Command, we have established a joint interagency and combined space operations center that will allow us to experiment with new operational concepts across the national security space enterprise and develop new concepts and associated tactics for future operations. We appreciate your support and review of this budget, which is critical to our national defense. Thank you.
Thank you. Admiral Haney, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Cooper and members of this committee. I am honored to be with you today, and I'm pleased to testify with Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Mr. Brian Mccuan. I'm also honored to be here to represent my sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines and civilians, my team, who carry out the varied missions assigned to U.S. Strategic Command. They are dedicated professionals who represent our most precious resource and deserve our unwavering support. As a result of their efforts, our nation's strategic nuclear deterrent force remains safe, secure, and effective and ready. And we are working hard to improve the resilience and flexibility in space and cyberspace. It is crucial that we modernize our strategic nuclear deterrence capabilities, which underpin our nation's security. As you know, the current global security environment is more complex, dynamic, and uncertain than possibly at any time in our history, and our adversaries and potential adversaries challenge our democratic values and our security in so many ways. They are modernizing and expanding their nuclear capabilities, developing and testing counterspace and cyberspace technologies, and are advancing conventional and asymmetric weapons. Future deterrent scenarios will likely include multiple adversaries operating across multiple domains, using anti-access, area denial, asymmetric warfare, and escalate to de-escalate tactics. These trends affect strategic stability. Given all of this, the missions of U.S. Strategic Command remain important to our joint military forces, our nation, and our allies and our partners. My command priorities guide our efforts. Comprehensive strategic deterrence, assurance, and escalation control is far more than just nuclear weapons and platforms. It also includes a robust foundational intelligence apparatus, space, cyberspace, conventional and missile defense capabilities, and comprehensive plans that link organizations together in a coherent manner. Additionally, we engage daily in a broad range of activities across our other mission areas: intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, countering weapons of mass destruction, joint electronic warfare, and analysis and targeting. Achieving comprehensive strategic deterrence, assurance, and escalation control requires a long-term approach to investing in capabilities and a multi-generational commitment to intellectual capital. The President's budget for FY17 strikes a responsible balance between national priorities, fiscal realities, and begins to reduce some of the risks we have accumulated because of deferred maintenance and sustainment. This budget supports my mission requirements, but there is no margin to absorb new risk. Any cuts to that budget will hamper our ability to sustain and modernize our military forces. I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
I thank you both for those opening statements. Now we'll start with questions. I'll recognize myself first. For both of you, have both of you participated in a nuclear exercise to demonstrate how the people and systems would work if they're ever called upon? Start with you, Mr. Mckeon.
Mr. Chairman, in my prior job in the White House, I took part in an exercise with the director of the White House Military Office. It was somewhere in 2013. I can't remember the date.
Okay. Admiral Haney.
Chairman, I've participated in a number of exercises as part of my job, as a minimum once a quarter, but I can't tell you how many I've had.
On nuclear exercises, was it your experience that the people and systems performed as you expected in those exercises?
Yes, Chairman, they did.
Mr. McCune.
Yes, they did, and part of the exercise that I was on was working on the quality of the communications, and actually performed better than we expected.
Good. Mr. McCune, to your knowledge, in your tenure at NSC and DOD, has President Obama actually participated in such an exercise?
I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Could you find out and let me know?
We can check.
At your convenience. Admiral Haney, I call your attention to the charts on the TV screens to your left and right. These show the so-called acquisition bow wave in the Department of Defense. This is a nuclear bow wave, or does the department, or is this a nuclear bow wave, or does the department have an acquisition bow wave across the services in practically every capacity? The chart may not be that helpful to you.
Chairman, I've seen a variety of charts relative to the need in our current plan in terms of needing resources in order to recapitalize and modernize our strategic forces. As you know, we have, in many cases, stretched out well beyond the life expectancy of many of our programs, and now we're at a point where we have to modernize various facets of our triad as well as our nuclear command and control capabilities. So that's what's creating this bow wave of sort that is discussed in various things such as the Congressional Budget Office reports and what have you that quantify it thereabouts 5 to 6% of our associated expected departmental budget over those years.
Mr. Mckeon, is the modernization of the deterrent the highest priority of the Department of Defense?
It is, yes, and the Secretary, I believe, has testified to that in the past.
Excellent. We hear, and this is also for you, we hear some people saying that the need to have a debate on modernization of the triad. What are your thoughts on this? Has the administration not debated these issues? Has the President not made his decisions in Congress as well?
Mr. Chairman, I think I've seen some of the comments you may be referring to, and those are interesting comments, but don't reflect the policy of the President or the administration. We have clear policy guidance from the Nuclear Posture Review, from the review on employment that was conducted early in the second term, and from the last Quadrennial Defense Review. And that guidance says we shall have a triad, and that's what we need to sustain, and that's what we need to modernize. We won't be here for these investments, or at least I won't in the next administration, but we're laying the foundation for the way ahead.
Excellent. Admiral Haney, I noted your stated concerns about the idea of overflights of the U.S. By Russia with a new advanced electro-optical sensor. The treaty also allows the Russian Federation to overfly the United States with infrared and synthetic aperture radar sensors. If electro-optical capability is at risk, what of these even more advanced capabilities are they a risk?
Chairman, with regarding the Open Skies Treaty, as we look at how technology has developed, one, it's not surprising to me that there would be a desire to use more advanced capabilities in order to conduct that Open Skies Treaty. While I am concerned in terms of overflights of any ability of another nation to learn more about our overall critical infrastructure, I do have respect for said treaty in terms of the 32-some nations that are also part of that treaty, in which it allows for transparency and the ability of sharing immediately that information that that treaty is associated with. So as we make these advances and as Russia is asked to apply additional capability, there's a process that's going through by which this is being assessed, and I feel that I have a voice in that process going forward here as we measure the pluses and minuses associated with that approach.
Well, you realize that Congress as policymakers are going to need to take those risks into consideration. We depend on you to give us a heads up as to what you see as the most threatening of those risks. And that's why I asked the question. With that, I'll turn to the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me point out the obvious here, which is there's an astonishing national consensus in both parties among most all people that the triad is important. In fact, it's vital to our national security, and it's our duty to keep it safe, secure, and reliable. That includes all the life extension programs, upgrades, to keep that capability state-of-the-art. We almost should be thankful that we face a few rivals and would-be rivals in the area, because think of how difficult it would be to fund all this if there were none. So now we have something to complain about and also build support behind. But it's our unquestioned superiority that is what we must maintain, and I'm just thankful that there is such a bipartisan consensus on these issues, and that the Admiral can testify in favor of the President's budget request wholeheartedly. I hope that this Congress will not only fund that amount, but actually find the real dollars to support it and not borrow that money, as we have for many other DoD expenditures. Mr. Mckeon, on a much smaller issue, the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program is an important program, and I understand that you would like to expound on some of the activities happening in North Africa regarding that program.
Mr. Cooper, thank you. As you and I discussed briefly this morning in the office call, we have recently begun work on a cooperative threat reduction program in North Africa. As you know, this program had its roots at the end of the Cold War in the former Soviet Union, but over time it's expanded, and Congress has given us the authority to expand it to other regions. And the specific authority here is to address an emerging proliferation threat. And what we are embarking on is working with the government of Tunisia to strengthen its border and security of its border with Libya, which is quite porous. A lot of people moving back and forth across it. You're probably aware of the strike we took in western Libya this weekend against several people in a camp, including a leader suspected of the Bardo Museum attack in Tunis last year. So we think this is an important and urgent project because of the threat to Tunisia of terrorists moving across that border, as well as from ISIS and from AQIM in its western mountains. We have seen ISIS using sulfur mustard in Iraq and Syria, so it's not a leap to suggest they might undertake similar attacks in Libya. And so we're very focused on trying to help the government of Tunisia, which is one of the started the Arab Spring and seeks to build on a new democracy, and it's under threat from a lot of places.
This is an emerging threat on the Tunisian border to prevent Libyan WMD, not nuclear, but chemical, from possibly crossing that border.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. And we have, I should say, Mr. Cooper, we've done similar projects strengthening border with an eye toward the WMD issue in Ukraine in the last couple of years, and in Jordan as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I appreciate that clarification. Mr. Chairman, I have no more questions at this time.
Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lambert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here and for the work that you each do for our country. Admiral Haney, it's always good to talk with you. Thank you for our earlier visit. And I'd like to follow up on something we chatted about briefly earlier, and that is the JICSPOC. And I'm encouraged to see that you're using Rapid Acquisition Authority for that, and also to see that the Mckeon is in the budget request. When do you think the JICSPOC will be fully operational?
Congressman Lambert, thank you for that question. The Joint Interagency Combined Space Operations Center, JICSPOC, very important to me and your Strategic Command, and I think to our nation, particularly as we work right now through our experimentation process, which goes through this summer, such that we can look at refining CONOPS, concept of operations, which will further help define what we need for the future. So we've completed a couple of those experiments, pretty elaborate, bringing in professionals across our Department of Defense space as well as our intelligence community space, coming together, working in a synergetic way so that we can look at how do we have space indications and warnings, situational awareness, attribution capability, all the way to what to do about it if that occurs. As such, this will take some time. I don't have a discrete timeline for you right now. We're working with the Office of Secretary of Defense Joint Staff and others in terms of providing those refined concepts of operation, which will further define that timeline. But I'm encouraged that we have some capability just in where we have experimented, if we needed to pull it together in a hurry to take matters at hand.
Okay, thank you. And for anyone who's unaware of what's happening here, it's just a way of integrating the DoD and the intelligence community so that they can look at space assets and what they have to offer together. And in other words, to integrate, the integration part is so critical there. Do you see roadblocks going forward, and do you have all the authorities you need to make sure this capability gets fielded as rapidly as it needs to be?
Congressman, as part of this, we're working through to really understand those authorities either we may need in heightened tensions and what have you in that regard as we work through various scenarios associated with it. As of right this moment, I have the authorities I need in order to work through this concept. There may become a time in the future where additional authorities are required.
And do you see any roadblocks on the way going forward?
Right now, the biggest roadblock, I would say, is working to establish what frequently is called like a common operational picture and how we can look at the dynamics, space situational awareness in a more refined manner as we look at the threats that other nations are working in their counter space programs. We're working on that, as you mentioned, the Mckeon type concept as a team right now, but we have to get there, and we're working on helping to define that through this experimental phase of the JICSPOC.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm going to shift gears completely, and this is kind of technical, but it's an important question that I've worked with staff on. The Air Force is completing its analyses of alternatives for the OPIR and AEH systems. Can you assure us that the analysis of alternatives will fully take into account your requirements, that is the warfighter requirements? And can you send the committee written details on the AOAs when the AOAs are completed?
Congressman, I would say yes to both questions. Work very closely with the Air Force and with the principal Department of Defense Space Advisor, Secretary James, as well as the Officer Secretary of Defense Staff as we look at this going forward. But I am a teammate in terms of working the analysis of alternatives for those programs.
Thank you so much.
Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Ashford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Admiral Haney, thanks again for keeping me abreast and our office abreast of the issues that you're raising here today and other issues as we've been proceeding along. And thank you for your work at Offutt and at STRATCOM in our area. It's exemplary work and admired by everyone. So thank you. I just want to, if I could, just reiterate what the chairman asked about the open skies issue. I did notice in our Omaha World Herald today a discussion that you had concerning that, and I would second the chairman's comments about, as we move forward, to be clear as to what we should or shouldn't do in regard to that. So with that, I also the fact that we do have missions from Offutt in the 55th that are part of that open sky, and so obviously have concerns about it in that regard. So anything you can do to keep us abreast would be great. I have a question, though, totally unrelated really to, I think, probably to the budget, but we've had this conversation before, and one of the concerns, very briefly, and we can talk about it further later, but this whole idea of standardizing cyber education and cyber security issues so that as this becomes more advanced and as the need for workforce in this area increases, what are your thoughts generally about trying to come up with some kind of standardized way to train our cyber force, and as the threats are so dynamic, so frequently changing, that if we have some sort of standardized way to educate our people. Do you have any general thoughts on that?
Congressman Ashford, first and foremost, the department is working, Joint Staff is working on an approach to ensure all of our employees, all of our workforce, all of our sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines do have a basic understanding of what we call cyber hygiene in terms of their role, one as a sensor and reporting and understanding what types of things they see on cyber and get those reported to the necessary team that works that. So you have a standardization of the population as a whole and the workforce as a whole. Then you have the standardization of the training associated with those that are at a higher level of working cyber defense and those type of operations for example, U.S. Cyber Command and the services in the work to ensure we have the necessary capability to protect the military systems and also to work to defend the nation.
You know, as we reach out to the private sector and obtaining expertise as we move forward, do you feel work needs to be done in how we train those individuals so that they better understand the standards that are applied in the military? Do you see that evolving?
I know a lot of the industry teams I talk to, et cetera, are very concerned about cyber as well. Across the country as a whole, I think the knowledge of the threat is improving. I do believe we have a lot more work to go in that regard. My commander for U.S. Cyber Command, Mike Rogers, has been involved in a variety of different areas in coupling together with other outside Department of Defense organizations in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral.
Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mckeon, you mentioned the Joint Interagency and Combined Space Operations Center, or JICSPOC. In your written statement, can you briefly discuss how this effort contributes to space mission assurance?
Congressman Kaufman, this is a little bit of an operational experiment. As Admiral Haney said, it's for focusing on space situational awareness and coordination between ourselves and the IC. And what they've been working on is, I think, a series of vignettes to sort of understand the operating picture and how we are integrating with our IC colleagues and even the private sector and some allies at some future point. So it's still early days in it. The Deputy Secretary has focused a lot on this, and he's already gone out there to pay a visit to it. I would defer to Admiral Haney and
Sure.
any other details he would have.
Congressman, we've been working a bit on space mission assurance even before we had the JICSPOC. What's nice about the JICSPOC concept is it's really honing in our efforts and working as a team, as was mentioned here. The business, first and foremost, very complicated environment by which we're working in, and the key of integrating all of our combined efforts, and that's why taking an interagency approach to this is very important in terms of being able to share, move information in a timely manner, and then have a more synergistic approach to the problem with both DOD and IC assets going forward, particularly as we look at what our adversaries, potential adversaries, are working toward. Everything from jamming, lasing, terrestrial launch rockets into space, and on-orbit kind of capabilities.
Sure. Admiral Haney, and then I'll go to Mr. Mckeon. We've heard a lot about the threats from North Korea and Iran in terms of missile threats. Can you comment on our missile warning posture in relation to these emerging threats?
Congressman, with regards to our missile warning posture, 24/7, I have servicemen and women that are manning stations, one, to very quickly report through our overall constellation of any launch that occurs anywhere on the planet. That information is moved quickly. It's backed up and verified by land-based radars in terms of things so that we can ascertain whether there is an attack against America or attack against an ally, or is it something we expect in a test or what have you. And there's a process and a procedure that moves that information all the way through command centers and what have you in terms of things. So that piece, I think, works very well today.
Do you have anything to add, Mr. McKeon?
I don't have anything to add to that, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McKeon, the CBO has estimated that the cost of maintaining the nuclear weapons and delivery vehicles to be approximately about $348 billion over 10 years. Is that an estimate that you agree with as a CBO estimate?
Maintaining the current infrastructure now, including modernization, or just sustaining what we have?
I think that's including modernization.
Yeah, I think our sense, it's probably in the ballpark, Congressman. I think our sense of the modernization in the years ahead is between 350 and 450 billion.
Over the next 10 years.
I think that's the number.
And somewhere around, although 30 years is a long way from now, we'll probably all be gone by then. There's a $1 trillion estimate from a lot of outside groups for over 30 years. Does that sound about right?
I'd have to check on that.
Yeah.
It may include a lot of ongoing sustainment and operation.
Sure.
It's not just the recapitalization.
Okay. So the point I'm getting at is to answer your question earlier to Mr. Rogers about the this being the highest of priorities in the budget. And if this is the highest of priorities in the budget, then again, you mentioned you get to go, knocking on wood, we get to stick around. What does that mean for the other priorities in the budget? And without adding dollars or adding relatively more dollars, what does that mean longer term for budgets, defense budgets?
Yes, sir. It's clear that future Congresses and future administrations face a big challenge with this. I think we discussed it a little bit in the hearing that Chairman Thornberry had last summer with the Deputy Secretary and the Vice Chairman, where we start in 2021. It's in this current Future Years Defense Program with the Ohio Replacement Program. And right now, for the nuclear enterprise in DoD, we pay about 3%. It's about 3% of the budget. It will grow to 5 or 6% during this recapitalization period. So it's a doubling, but still not a huge part of the department budget. I think our leadership would say today, if we continue to see the fiscal constraints that are in place, the Budget Control Act is still there, notwithstanding the 2-year relief from the balanced budget deal. We would probably need some top line relief in the 2020s in order to accommodate this. But as Secretary Carter said, it's the top priority, so we need to figure out a way to pay for it.
I would just note a doubling of billions of dollars is, even though it might be a 3% to 5%, is a lot of money.
Indeed.
It's still a lot of money, and still puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the budget. Just want to be sure we're clear about that. Can you talk a little bit about the THAAD missile defense batteries and the discussion going on with South Korea and what we can expect? Is South Korea ready to incorporate that into their defenses? And if an agreement was signed today, actually how long would it take until a THAAD system could be even operational in Iraq?
As you know, we recently announced with our Korean partners consultations on deploying THAAD to the Republic of Korea. And I think there's a formal meeting next week, General Scaparrotti mentioned in his testimony this morning. And I think probably the long pole in the tent is the site, the land for the battery. And I don't know how long that would take to come to agreement with the Koreans on and the funding for that. I think once we had it in place, I don't think it would take very long to deploy it. We have the battery available. So I think that would be the main issue in the near term.
Admiral Haney spoke a little bit this morning. I just wanted to get your feedback again on a recent GAO report that found that overlapping testing and acquisition of additional interceptors for Alaska risk compromising the reliability of the system, and want to know how much you agree with that analysis, if at all, and then related, are you concerned about the deterrent capability of that system as a result?
Congressman, I think it's very important relative to that report that we're able to populate our missile fields up to that 44 number by 2017, which is the plan. And as I look at the priorities for missile defense, it's also very important that we are able to conduct the necessary testing so that we can have a most reliable kill vehicle as well as discrimination. So getting to the long-range discriminating radar is important for future. And looking at other alternatives so that we can work that cost curve associated with our approach per missile so that we can be even better as a deterrent.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's good for me for now. Thanks. Yield back.
Chair, and I recognize a gentleman from Oklahoma for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here and testifying before our committee. Admiral Haney, I wanted to talk to you for a second about the JSPOC. We've had opportunities to talk about it. We have heard testimony on this committee from General Raymond when he was JFCC Space that space is getting more contested, more congested. And, one of the challenges they have at the JSPOC is doing all of the conjunction analysis and reporting, not only for DoD purposes, but also for all the commercial operators and foreign operators. And as this continues, the burden is getting bigger and bigger. And I would like to hear from your perspective, do you believe this burden is going to continue to grow with all the commercial activities and foreign activities in space?
I absolutely do think the activities in space will continue to grow, which ultimately means the activities that our Joint Space Operations Center there in Vandenberg, California, that works space situational awareness from that point, absolutely will continue to grow.
We've also heard testimony from General Hyten and General Raymond about not wanting the DoD to be the FAA for space. Is that a concern that you share as the commander of STRATCOM?
Well, I think when we say we don't want to be the FAA for space, what does that mean? When I hear that, what's really being discussed is that's in the bin of what I'd call space traffic control.
Okay.
In terms of things. As a Department of Defense with critical capability in space, we don't get a pass. We have to understand space situational awareness, and I would say as the years go on, given where our potential adversaries are investing in counter space capability, we're going to have even better space situational awareness capability, data fusion capability, et cetera. And this is some of the work that's ongoing here as we experiment in the JSPOC, the Joint Interagency Combined Space Operations Center.
Right. So the concern I have is that as we continue moving forward with all of the activities, we've heard, OneWeb is launching a constellation of 800 satellites into low Earth orbit. SpaceX is talking about a constellation of 4,000 satellites into low Earth orbit. It seems at some point, I think everybody agrees we've got to make sure that the DoD is the #1 entity in the world when it comes to space situational awareness, not only taking advantage of all of our sensors and our software, but also taking advantage of what commercial is doing and integrating commercial capabilities and even what foreign countries are doing, that are our partners and allies integrating that as well. My concern is that we could lose focus by really taking up a lot of our manpower resources to do conjunction analysis when there are two, say, commercial communication satellites in LEO, which isn't really the case these days, but in the future will be. They could be conjunction analysis in mass volumes could really burden the JSPOC in the future, and I just want to make sure that that's something that you're thinking about as the commander of STRATCOM as we move forward.
Absolutely, Congressman. I would just say, as we look at this, and then like you said, as Space Fence comes on board
Yes.
here, the amount of data will come up, et cetera. But there are certain attributes that have to be done even from a space traffic control as well as space situational awareness. And with it, we have to have information assurance, data protection has to be part of that as we go forward. And already, and with it, we have to have automation and better fusion capability. So however we do it in the future, those are the attributes. We're clearly working and definitely thinking about that going forward.
And I'm running out of time here, but I just want to get this. Maybe you can respond in writing at some point. When we go forward with the future communication architecture, one of the challenges we have on this committee is not getting an accurate assessment of SATCOM utilization. What percentage of our SATCOM, how much gigabits per second or gigabits in general are flowing through commercial, vice military, and which commercial satellites are carrying most of the capacity, and in what regions, and do we have any underutilized capacity? Are we purchasing capacity beyond what we need? Maybe there's areas where we don't have enough capacity. So just getting an accurate assessment of SATCOM utilization would be very valuable for us, and I know that's one of the missions of STRATCOM, and very much appreciate if we could get an update there.
Absolutely, Congressman
Okay.
Bryanson.
Thank you, Admiral.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Zinke, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be with your community today. Admiral, my background is Navy SEALs, and I spent a lot of time, looking at security. And recently, I went out to Malmstrom Air Force Base, and I'm concerned about the helos, particularly the Vietnam era Hueys. From talking to folks on the ground, looking at it, and I concur, these are aging helicopters, as well as they don't have the lift and capacity. And if they do get an alert situation, they just don't have the hover time and the distances in Montana, and I assume Minot. I understand that you did go out to exercise Mighty Guardian recently. Do you share my same concerns about the Hueys?
Congressman, absolutely, in terms of thinking very crisply associated with what we need to do to improve security of our missile fields, and part of that effort has included looking at those UH-1s and working with the Air Force and Joint Staff in terms of our methodology going forward. So I know the Air Force has a plan now by which they plan to work to replace those helicopters, but the attributes you listed are the attributes that concern me in terms of the capability, not just now, but into the future.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter it into the record response from the Secretary of Air Force to Chairman Rogers. In it, reading through it, she notes until we replace the Hueys, it's not going to be possible to meet the alert requirement in that letter. Are you familiar with the letter, Admiral?
I'm not exactly sure which letter you're talking about. I am understanding of the requirements associated with what we need the security helicopters to do.
But you would concur, though, that it is a priority to make sure we have an alert requirement and that the teams that are operating have the right aircraft and the right capacity and lift?
Absolutely, sir.
Congressman, if I could interject, the Deputy Secretary is very focused on this, and we've had discussions about an interim solution until the Air Force procures the replacement. So we don't have a solution yet, but it's gone up to the Deputy, and we will meet the Admiral Haney's requirement.
Well, I do sit on the sea power side of it, and I know that we looked at, as the Navy moves around their helicopters, their MH-60s, to see whether or not it would be possible to transdeck some of those, and it doesn't seem possible. So I think the solution is to look at maybe perhaps with the Army contractor, find a vehicle where we can get you the right helicopter replacement. I came in the service in 1985. I remember the Hueys, but I haven't flown on a Huey since the mid-'90s. And I was surprised when I went out there and saw them. They're an aging aircraft, but they just don't have the lift. And Montana's got large expanses, let alone the weather, and then just the lift capacity. If they do get in trouble, they just don't have the lift to get the right people out there and stay on station. Sir?
I was just going to say I've ridden the ones at F.E. Warren. They run very well, and the people who maintain them know how to maintain them, and they have a high operational readiness rate, but they are very old, as you say, and there is the weight issue.
Thank you for your service, sir, and I yield the rest remaining of my time.
And I thank the gentleman. His letter will be taken into the record without objection. And you know, Secretary, I'm glad to hear, Secretary Mccuan, that you say that y'all have taken that up, because it is something that I put a lot of attention on as the ranking member. We are very concerned about seeing those helicopters replaced, and I hope that you can help the Air Force stop being so worried about being sued and start making the right decisions, and the other stuff will work itself out. I just wanted to go back before I close out, and the topic that I was talking about with you, Admiral Haney, before I yielded to the ranking member for his questions, and that goes back to this open skies issue. Can you discuss with us in this open setting what exactly the Russians are overflying as far as infrastructure and what they're getting out of those flights?
Congressman, Chairman Rogers, I think that might be better discussed in a closed hearing in terms of things, but they follow a flight plan and they fly over the United States. We know where they're going to go, that sort of thing. That covers a lot of areas. It's a transparency treaty, so likewise we work with those other 30-some nations to also likewise fly over Russian areas.
Well, I'll ask you in the closed session then. What about this? Can you talk about this in the open setting? Do you know how open skies fits into the Russian overall collection strategy?
Well, I don't have the Russian intelligence guidebook available to me, but I will say that given the lack of overhead capability that the Russians have, open skies gives them a capability to be able to reconnoiter parts of our country and other nations as part of that.
Okay, that's all I've got. I'll yield to the ranking member for any additional questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to wait till the classified session.
Okay, then I'll go to Mr. Larson from Washington State. I understand he has another set of questions.
Yeah, just one question, and this is give some context for tomorrow. We have the full committee as General Breedlove coming to testify. So I wanted to hear from both of you. You can choose which one goes first, but what would be your recommendations in response to Russia's non-compliance with the INF Treaty, thinking specifically to INF Treaty, but also broadly?
Congressman Larson, I spent a good deal of time in December in this room with your colleagues and the colleagues on the House Foreign Affairs Committee on this issue. So I would refer you for an in-depth discussion there. But in brief, what we have done is looked at Russia's activities, not just in regard to its violations of the INF Treaty, but its other behavior in Europe and its fairly belligerent rhetoric, and made a number of investments in the defense of Europe and in technologies that will be utilized in Europe against the A2AD challenge that Russia poses, including because of their development of this non-compliant INF missile. So we're putting a lot of thought, work into it at UCOM and in the department, and a lot of resources to respond to what we see as a much broader Russian challenge, not just in its behavior in INF, but what they've done in Ukraine, some of the rhetoric, and there are some other treaties where we have compliance concerns, including the Open Skies Treaty. If I could amend briefly the answer before Mr. Larson, and we'll get you a written answer. I may have misspoken. Our understanding is the 350 to 450 estimate is for modernization over several, more than a decade, but I'll clarify that for the record.
All right, with that, we will recess for 5 minutes while we move to room 2216 for the closed portion of this hearing.